So sometimes I feel like people don't really know how yoga can help them. And often the images we see on social media are of people who are doing yoga almost as their sport. So like it's their whole goal to make their body fit into these certain shapes. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's a little bit unrelatable and even like irrelevant to a lot of people. So I wanted to share a little bit about my timeline and talk about how specifically my yoga practice has evolved alongside my involvement with combat sports over the last 20 years, like Muay Thai, jiu-jitsu, MMA, wrestling. And I just really want to use this as an example of how a practice can change over time. And I just want to show a tiny bit of how yoga can benefit a person. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you're curious about yoga can help you or just like help anyone, keep watching. I'm Mae-Lin, I'm a yoga teacher and personal trainer, and I help people to get better at life through the many practices of yoga. So while you're here, make sure you're subscribed to get the latest on useful videos like this one. So I have spent about 2 decades training, fighting, sometimes coaching in various combat sports, starting with Muay Thai and including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA and wrestling. And the demands of these sports are pretty intense and injuries are common. So it's really important to take good care of yourself, especially as you start getting older, as you put those miles like on the clock of your body, so to speak. So I started Muay Thai as a teenager, and at that time, my yoga practice was sporadic. So being super young, I barely needed to sleep, let alone think about recovery. So I didn't really connect yoga much to like my sporting performance at the time. Like I always stretched before and after training, but stretching is not yoga. But in terms of yoga itself, I kind of would go to a class at like a gym or a studio sometimes, and I'd always feel great afterwards, like super relaxed and whatever. So I kind of viewed it more as a treat, like a massage or a spa day. And yeah. But about 6 years into my Muay Thai journey, I got sick. I initially got glandular fever, and I trained through that and I fought with that. And I really do not recommend that because I went on to develop chronic fatigue syndrome as a result of that. So, I had to take time out of training and really like out of life. And it was quite debilitating. So yoga started to feature a little bit more in my routine. Like when you go through something like this, things that you previously take for granted, they just become so costly in terms of the energy demand that sometimes you can't even do them, right? So it took a lot of energy for me to like leave the house or do anything whatsoever. So I really turned towards like TV, DVDs and the internet in order to be able to practice yoga at home. And my practices at the time were like super gentle. So it would be like a 30-minute practice, maybe yin yoga or like a really gentle like beginner's hatha class. And even then I would often struggle. I'd struggle with poses like chair pose, chaturanga, plank, anything where you have to support your body weight. And for someone who was previously, like training for hours a day, fighting people in the ring, this was super demoralizing. This was like a really difficult thing to accept, like these kinds of limitations. Yeah, but having access to some kind of home practice that focused on nourishing the body instead of pushing it, and that included some like mindfulness and relaxation was really important to me. I think it kept me connected to my body in a healthy way, and I don't know, it was like a little bit of a mood boost, I suppose. Even just the simple act of like mindfulness or whatever, it just gave me a little bit of positivity at a time when positivity was quite hard to come by. So it was quite a lifesaver, and I'm really glad that the practices were accessible because of the internet and TV and DVDs. This was a while ago. So as I recovered, I was able to get back into training. And around this time, I also started jiu-jitsu and then MMA. So my training schedule started to get pretty demanding. Um, so sometimes I would have 10 training sessions in a week, and this on top of like working, surviving capitalism and studying. So having had bad experiences with my health before, I was really conscious of monitoring my energy levels and, like budgeting my energy and looking all the time at like what was draining my energy, what's costing energy, and then what's putting energy back into me. And one of those things that I identified was putting energy back into me was yoga. But once again, it was like short practices, maybe like 30, 45 minutes max, gentle classes. Again, yin, restorative, gentle hatha. And at this time, I also took advantage of a lot of online memberships, which were getting, more popular and accessible at the time. And I would do my practices at home. And, at the time, it did feel like, I wasn't doing real yoga because it was online and not in a studio, But it was just the best thing for me at the time because, going to a car, commuting to a studio, blah, 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 that all took a lot of time. And it took energy as well that I felt would have like cancelled out the benefit of that. So a home practice with the guidance of like online classes was hugely beneficial to me at that time. So I'm curious, like, have you ever gone through a period in your life with health or something else where you've really struggled with your energy levels? So I know this is a kind of sensitive topic, but if you feel comfortable, I'd really like to know, what did you find helped? And what kinds of things did you need to cut out of your life in order to preserve your energy? If you feel comfortable sharing, like, please like leave something about your experiences in the comment section. So, getting back to my story, I was always used to being fairly flexible. But when I started wrestling, that's when I started to become conscious of my flexibility and how flexibility was an amazing asset. So, like when I was training in wrestling, it was really male dominated, and there was also this weird, like very old school culture around it about toughness and whatever. So none of the guys I was training with did yoga or even stretched. I honestly don't know that I ever saw anyone stretch. So they were really fit, really well conditioned, really strong, but not flexible at all. And during a training camp at the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, we all did a lot of like functional testing. And one of the things they tested was flexibility. And that's good because I did terribly in the strength test, let me say. But with flexibility, I was the second most flexible wrestler in Australia that year. The first most flexible being a former gymnast. And so after that, my coach started to make an example of me and my flexibility, and he would start to tell these guys that they needed to do yoga or to like improve their flexibility. And that's when I kind of realized, like, sometimes you have these physical attributes and you're not conscious of how they help you. But after that, I became quite conscious of the fact that, flexibility can make it easier to defend certain takedowns. It can make it, harder for your opponents to get certain grips and turn you over and things like that. Don't want to get into too much technical wrestling stuff, but yeah, I started to become aware that this was a strength that I had. So yeah, I started to become more conscious actually of my yoga practice and of my asana practice specifically, and how it played a role like in improving my performance. And around this time as well, like I had been in combat sports for almost 15 years, I also started to struggle with like some chronic injuries and things. So my asana practice also became part of managing my injuries. A lot of the advice, like good qualified advice that I was getting, was around correcting these muscular imbalances that had happened from like years and years of repetitive movements through sport. So some of that included strength training, like strengthening weakened areas, but part of that also included the need to stretch to create space and length in other muscles that had gotten really tight. And I just found that asanas, right, our yoga poses, were much more effective at this than the stretches I was kind of being given in like the gym or in physiotherapy and whatever. kind of a side note, but sometimes at that time anyway, in physiotherapy and stuff, it seemed like people were thinking of muscles in isolation, but in real life, muscles don't act in isolation, they act synergistically. And I think that yoga approaches the body in more of this synergistic way, where we think about lines and movements and things as opposed to like the actions of individual muscles. But anyway, I kind of digress. So yeah, wrestling, getting a lot of injuries, and some of these injuries and their requirements kind of shaped what I did next. And I basically at that point transitioned away from wrestling, away from MMA, and away from striking like altogether. And I just started to focus exclusively on jiu-jitsu. So I found that because of the huge variety of movement patterns that are available in jiu-jitsu, it was a lot easier for me to specialize, form game plans, and basically avoid aggravating my injuries and work around my strengths. So I actually became a guard player. And if you know anything about jiu-jitsu, you know that attacks from guard and also guard retention are just exponentially more effective when you are flexible. So you can play guard, of course, without being flexible, but flexibility just opens up so many more opportunities. So my physical yoga practice became really, really important, not just for recovery and injury management, but also in directly improving my performance in the sport. And I would even say that my physical yoga practice allowed me to change my body and change the ranges through which my body can move to the point where I was able to do things that I couldn't do at all before. So for example, after wrestling and Muay Thai, my neck was really stiff and I couldn't invert in jiu-jitsu without hurting my neck. And through the physical practice of yoga, I was able to completely change that pattern so that I can now invert very comfortably. Okay, you get the idea. So I know this was a lot of information. I've had to try and squeeze a 20-year journey into less than 15 minutes. And obviously this is a very abridged version, but I hope you get the idea of how a practice can and should evolve over time. So it can feature more or less prominently, it can give you different benefits like recovery, relaxation, energy, injury management, flexibility. I think my story shows all of that. And I've only scratched the surface because I've only really spoken about the physical benefits and how they relate to my sport. And obviously yoga is more than the physical practice, and the benefits are much broader than what you've experienced just in sport. In any case, if you feel curious or inspired or interested after hearing this about maybe how yoga can help you, I really encourage you to check out my website, yogawithmaelin.com. If you sign up for my newsletter, you can get a free guided meditation and also a workbook with some journal prompts that can help you to reflect on your meditation practice and refine it and take different actions with it going forward to really make it your own. I also have quite a large variety of classes available on my website, and I'm always updating them weekly. So there's always new content on there. So you can rent a class or get a really affordable membership with unlimited access. Yeah, as you've heard in my story, I've gotten a lot of benefit out of home practice, and so I love making this kind of material accessible for other people too. All right, thank you so much for spending your time with me. Take care, and until next time, peace.